Welcome to the Stakeholder Engagement Navigator web tool. I'm Dr. Bethany Kwan, a health researcher at the University of Colorado.
And I'm Griselda Peña Jackson, Executive Director of 2040 Partners for Health.
If you're new to stakeholder engagement in research, you might be wondering what stakeholder engagement is and why it's important for your research. I've asked Griselda to join me here today to talk about our experiences engaging stakeholders and community members in research. So to start, why should researchers consider engaging stakeholders in their research? What are the benefits?
I think that community members can be involved from the beginning, and it starts to build a relationship so that the research can benefit both community members and stakeholders.
And from a researcher's perspective, I can say I've really benefited because I know the work that I'm doing will really make a difference to people, that the investment that we're making, that the taxpayers are making in a lot of cases in conducting research is something that will really matter to people, that answers questions that our communities and stakeholders really care about. So what have you seen as far as stakeholder engagement changing some of the ways that research is conducted? How has that had an influence?
I think that the researchers gain a relationship with the community and the stakeholders. They also begin to form long-term relationships that enable them to create and do research that is directly benefiting the community and on topics that community members are concerned about.
What skills do you need to gain to do this well? What have you noticed?
So you have to be a good listener. You have to be flexible. I think it's also really important that your heart is in the right place when you approach community, that it's not only going to be gainful for you, but for the community and for stakeholders. And so really giving them a place within your research from the beginning, and then engaging them throughout. And in the end, have it not be the end, right? That you are able to continue that relationship and that they get to know what it is that you found and how it's going to affect them. Usually research stays within academic settings, and we need to break that cycle. I know that you and I have talked about that before. It's really important that this information gets back to community members, because in the end, they are the ones that live day to day with whatever your research topic is on.
So that transparency, that willingness to stick around long enough that you're actually sharing what's been learned, to disseminate what's been learned, that's a very important stage of the research process that I think I know that I'm often guilty of. It's way too tempting to just move on to the next thing, to the next grant, and not really follow through. Even sometimes it's hard for us to publish in academic journals the results of our research, and then disseminating back to our stakeholders and interpreting what we've learned with community members, not just telling them what our insights are, but asking them for their insights. That process takes time and can take strategies for engagement that may be different from what we've done to engage them in planning, engaging them in implementation and conduct of their research. And so these different phases of research can really require different types of methods and approaches. The other thing, really concretely, that I know I've needed to learn is group facilitation techniques. A lot of our stakeholder engagement is gathering people together in a room, real or virtual, and asking them what they think about things. And so having those skills to know how to ask questions, how to have a discussion, is something that I've really had to hone over the years and am still working on.
Yeah, I think that is very true. It takes a long time to really begin to engage community members and stakeholders. And when I say listening, that means a lot of different things, right? It means having a conversation with community members, but it also means building trust and allowing them to have a space where they can be honest and truthful about what they think about what you're doing. Many times that could be in the form of saying, no, that's not what we envisioned, and you're kind of off the rails over here. You're doing your own thing, and this engagement was meaningless. Also giving community members the opportunity to step away and say, this isn't what I want, and being open to that. And so not putting everything into certain boxes and thinking this is the way that I have to do things. You want to be able to develop trust, build in within your research time to get to know them, right, on a personal level, and to understand where they're coming from, depending on their background or their experience. I find that if you're respectful of those things, you will have a much more richer experience working with those community members. There are also community members that they're not as comfortable speaking in the group and they want to have a side conversation with you. There might be something that, they don't agree with another community member, but they're not necessarily going to say that because you have to remember that those community members, they see each other after this. They're going to be in that same community after this conversation, after this meeting. And so you also don't know what the dynamic of that relationship is. Right. And so it's very important to continue to be open to those things too.
Absolutely. And they're, especially the introverts in the room, giving them plenty of opportunity and ways of providing input that doesn't require them to speak out loud. Being sensitive to technology limitations. We increasingly do many of our advisory board meetings virtually during the context of the pandemic, which we wouldn't usually have done, but that's become a necessity to continue our work. And so being very sensitive to technology limitations and what people are able to do through whatever technology they happen to have available has become important. What are your perspectives on the fit between having a particular engagement method like bootcamp translation, perhaps like having advisory panels, and the notion of authentic engagement?
I think being really honest with community members about your method, what you're trying to accomplish, why there's value in that, and also allowing community members to take time to understand where they fit into that method, because inevitably there's a place for them somewhere in there, and being realistic, not setting them up for expectations that you're not going to be able to meet. And really, getting to understand where they're coming from and maybe getting into a conversation about what their agenda is when they're doing this research. It could be that they just want to have oversight over what you're doing because you are in their community doing research. Others want to be involved in the entire process and teaching them the process, the method that you're using. You're an expert in what you're doing, and treating them as experts and explaining to them why it's important that you do this so that your research can be successful and potentially lead to further research in that particular topic.
We do tend to be very task-oriented as researchers, very action-oriented, want decisions to be made, want to get through a checklist item, and yet that's part of what I've had to learn over the years is when I feel that impatience, I still have that impatience. I still want to move on sometimes. And having some sort of mindfulness skills almost to recognize that in myself, just observe it and let it go and not try to interfere and not try to step in. But then sometimes I do know I do need to wrap up this conversation. We do need to respect people's time. We've asked them for 1 hour. Let's make sure we are finishing up at 1 hour. And sometimes we'll go, 4 or 5 minutes late, and that's okay. But certainly giving people permission to leave whenever they need to. But that recognizing in myself my tendencies and not imposing that on the group is something I've had to learn.
So that's really building a partnership, right? Where you can decide, this is where we need to go, this is where I need to give, and this is where I need to take. That's really important. And, sharing what you do know. Community members, they're not facilitators. They're sometimes not interested in some of the topics that you want to discuss, or they don't feel that those things need to be highlighted in in that particular situation. So maybe moving things to a different agenda is important. But in the end, I think community members are able to recognize that you're coming from a place of, we've brought you here to complete this task, let's get this done, and I've left room for us to do other things. Many times we have food at our meetings, and we have a time to take breaks, and all of those things are really important, and you need to honor those things too.
So let's say I've gotten this grant, and I wrote into my grant that I would engage stakeholders in designing some sort of product to getting the word out, but I didn't actually go talk to my stakeholders or my community in advance to make sure this was something that they were interested in. Should I not try? Is there no hope at that point for community engagement, or is there still a possibility?
I think that there's still a possibility, but you have to build in time to create relationships with those community members and stakeholders. That could mean a couple of weeks to months. Once you've done that, you also have to think about, have you already created your entire plan? And is there room for community members to have a voice in that? If you don't have that, unfortunately, it might be too late. Be as honest as possible and say, I've already established this research, I've gotten a grant for it. Community members are very smart and they're experts in their community. And so they'll be able to tell if you've already established many of the things that you're going to be doing, and being honest with them where there can be changes and where there can't be. Additionally, being open to their ability to engage and to what level they want to engage. So some community members will be very involved. Others only want to drop in and see what you're doing, and that's perfectly okay. Being flexible in that area and allowing them the opportunity to tell you if you're completely off point and it's not something that they want to do. That's really difficult to hear sometimes, whether you're a community member, a stakeholder, or a researcher. But once you establish some rapport with them, telling them along the way where changes can be made and where they can't be. Every community is different, and so you can't go in thinking, I engaged, 5 different communities or 5 different groups of stakeholders, and now I'm an expert, because every one of them is going to be different. And treating them as individual approaches, you'll be better served that way.
So am I hearing you say that even when I've been doing this for a very long time, it is always still valuable to talk to other people, other researchers who have engaged that community, other researchers who have tried different methods, and so is that what I'm hearing you say?
Absolutely. I think you need to continue to kind of grow your arsenal to engage communities. That could be from colleagues, that could be from, community leaders. It could even be understanding groups that are already established. So there might be researchers that might allow you to come work with their group or just peek in and see what they're doing. That will allow you to understand the experience from a different perspective.
Thank you so much for joining me today, Griselda. I really appreciate it. For those watching, we hope we inspired you to engage stakeholders in your research.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
If you want to learn more about how to use this web tool to guide your engagement activities, watch our video using the Stakeholder Engagement Navigator web tool, or visit the Education Hub on our website.